Just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. This is the painful lesson being learned by Kyle Rittenhouse and the other individuals who were shot and killed that led up to the murder trial in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The jury has now spoken. So what was Rittenhouse convicted of? What was he acquitted of? And what happens next? Well, you're about to find out. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you are watching A Lawyer Up. In today's episode, we are going to take a look at the Kyle Rittenhouse jury trial that just wrapped up in Kenosha. We're going to go back to the summer of 2020, and we're going to look at the incident with Jacob Blake that started the civil unrest that prompted Rittenhouse to pick up an AR-15 and head to Kenosha in the first place. We're going to look at exactly what happened a couple of nights later when three individuals, two of whom were killed, were shot by Kyle Rittenhouse. We're going to look generally at several relevant issues with Wisconsin state laws. We're going to look at their open carry rules. We're going to look at their stand your ground law, when you can use deadly force in defense of yourself, and who has the burden of proving self-defense at a trial. Then we're going to hit the highlights of the witness testimony from the trial. We're going to look at the specific charges that were filed against Rittenhouse and how the jury ruled on each one. And last but not least, we're going to talk about what happens next, if anything. If you enjoy the episode, hit that like button for me. If you got something to say, put it in the comment sections below. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you are notified every time that we upload. And recall that all of our episodes are available on the major podcast outlets. Last but not least, we got merch. If you want to support the channel, pick yourself up a hat, pick yourself up a t-shirt. To order, you simply follow the link in the description below. So let's talk about the facts of how all of this got started. We go to Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's a city of about 100,000 people on Lake Michigan in extreme southeastern Wisconsin. It's located between Chicago and Milwaukee. So on August 23rd of 2020, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was shot 7 times by a Kenosha police officer after an encounter with police who were attempting to arrest him pursuant to an outstanding warrant. Blake walked away from the officers and attempted to re-enter his girlfriend's vehicle after being told not to, and was shot as he got into the driver's side. The officer would later state that he thought he was about to be stabbed because Blake had been in possession of a knife. Blake would survive, but suffered partial paralysis from the waist down. Protesters took to the streets to protest the incident. A couple of nights later, after 2 days of civil unrest in Kenosha, Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old from Antioch, Illinois, a city about 20 miles away, headed up to Kenosha with his buddy and an AR-15 rifle to help. And in the midst of the chaos that night, he shot and killed 2 men and wounded a third during confrontations at different locations in Kenosha. Rittenhouse would be charged with 7 separate crimes and stood trial in November 2021 for murder, amongst other charges. Let's talk about some of the major legal issues and concepts that surrounded this trial. Now, Wisconsin is an open carry state, which means that you can openly carry a firearm, including an AR-15, unless you are prohibited from possessing a weapon, like if you're a convicted felon or someone under an order of protection, and unless the area restricts the ability to open carry, like in a government building, a school, an airport, those types of places. Now, Wisconsin restricts this right to those that are 18 and over if that firearm is considered a dangerous weapon. So Rittenhouse, at age 17, was charged with a misdemeanor but the judge dismissed that charge at trial because the AR-15 did not have a short barrel that would make it a, quote, dangerous weapon under Wisconsin statutes. Next, everybody has the right to defend themselves with reasonable force. But in order to use deadly force in defense of a person, you have to be facing imminent death or serious bodily harm. And you can't use deadly force to protect property. It has to be in defense of human life. Also, you can't provoke the encounter that you are defending yourself against. So, for example, I can't slap you in the face and when you get ready to hit me back, shoot you and say, oh, it was self-defense. If you provoke the encounter, you lose the right to argue for self-defense. That was important because in the case involving Rittenhouse, the prosecution alleged that he provoked the situation and therefore lost his right to argue self-defense. Now, Wisconsin is not a stand your ground state, meaning that an individual has a duty to retreat from an encounter if he can do so safely prior to using deadly force. Now, there's no duty to retreat from one's home or auto or business under the Castle Doctrine in Wisconsin, but whether Rittenhouse could have or should have retreated from these encounters before using deadly force was also at issue at the trial. Further, once self-defense has been injected as a defense, in some states the defendant has the burden of proving he or she had the right to use self-defense. Not in Wisconsin. Once injected, the burden flips and the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not have the right to use self-defense, and that is a significant advantage for defendants. Now that we understand those general concepts, let's look at the specific charges that Rittenhouse was facing. Number one was first-degree reckless homicide with use of a dangerous weapon. This felony charge was in connection to the death of Joseph Rosenbaum, the first man that Rittenhouse shot. So this whole mess got started when someone, not Rittenhouse, fired a shot into the air. Then all hell breaks loose, right? Bystander video shows Rosenbaum taunting and then chasing Rittenhouse through a parking lot and then throwing something at him. Rittenhouse then goes behind a car. Rosenbaum follows and is shot. Now, there is no video of the exact moment that Rittenhouse pulled the trigger, but Richard McGinnis, a reporter who was trailing Rittenhouse, told investigators that Rosenbaum tried to grab Rittenhouse's gun prior to being shot. Reckless homicide differs from intentional homicide in that prosecutors don't have to prove intention to murder. They only have to show a reckless disregard for human life. That charge is a felony punishable by up to 60 years in prison. The dangerous weapon add-on carries another 5 years. However, self-defense is a complete defense to the charge, and the jury found in favor of the defendant in regard to the shooting death of Rosenbaum. The second charge was first-degree reckless endangerment of the safety of another with the use of a dangerous weapon. This felony charge is also connected to the Rosenbaum shooting. The reporter, Richard McGinnis, told investigators he was in the line of fire and therefore endangered when Rittenhouse shot Rosenbaum. That charge was also a felony punishable by 12.5 years in prison. Again, the weapons modifier could add 5 more. However, again, self-defense is a trump to that charge. The jury found in favor of the defendant in regard to endangering McGinnis. The third charge is first-degree reckless endangerment of the safety of another with the use of a dangerous weapon. So, after the shooting of Rosenbaum, video shows Rittenhouse running down the street and then falling down. Video then shows an unknown man leaping at Rittenhouse and trying to kick him. Rittenhouse fired 2 rounds at that man but missed as that man hit the ground and ran away. Again, self-defense would apply here. This charge is a felony punishable by 12.5 years in prison. The weapons modifier would add another 5, but the jury found in favor of Rittenhouse in regard to firing at this man. Number 4 was first-degree intentional homicide with use of a dangerous weapon. This charge is connected to Anthony Huber's death. He was the second person that was shot. So immediately after the man kicks at Rittenhouse and misses, Huber leaps at him, swings a skateboard at his head and neck, and tries to grab Rittenhouse's gun before being shot. Now, not to make light of his death, but Huber did literally bring a skateboard to a gunfight. Now, intentional homicide means just that. A person killed someone and meant to do it. The count carries a mandatory life sentence. The weapons modifier would make it life plus 5. However, once again, self-defense trumps the charge. And the jury found in favor of the defendant, Rittenhouse, in regard to killing Huber. Number 5 was the attempted first-degree intentional homicide with use of a dangerous weapon. And this is the charge against Rittenhouse for shooting Gage Grosskreutz in the arm. So seconds after he shot Huber, and as Grosskreutz was coming forward holding a pistol, video shows that Rittenhouse pointed his gun at Grosskreutz and fired a single round. Now, Grosskreutz would survive. The charge carried a maximum sentence of 60 years. The weapons modifier would add an additional 5, but the jury found again in favor of the defendant in regard to shooting Grosskreutz. The 6th charge was possession of a dangerous weapon by a person under 18. The charge was a misdemeanor punishable by up to 9 months behind bars, but it was dismissed by the judge prior to submission of the case to the jury, as was charge number 7, failure to comply with an emergency order from a state or local government. Now, Kenosha officials had imposed an 8 p.m. curfew on the night of the shootings. Rittenhouse was still on the streets well past 8 p.m. The offense was punishable by up to $200 in fines, but the judge dismissed that charge at trial as well. So for those of you that are curious, let's talk about the highlights of what happened during the trial. Now, on Monday, November 1st, it was the first day, and the jury was selected. That Tuesday, we heard opening statements, and the prosecutor painted a picture of chaos the night of the shooting, stating that despite all of that chaos, the only individual that felt the need to shoot somebody was Rittenhouse. Prosecuting attorney Thomas Binger stated in his opening statement, quote, "The same loud noises, the same gunfire, the same arson, the same tear gas, the same hostile confrontations, and yet, out of all of these hundreds of people, only one person killed someone." The defense's argument was that Rittenhouse acted in self-defense to protect himself when he shot Joseph Rosenbaum. This spurred a response from the crowd, which led to Rittenhouse being attacked by several other individuals, including Anthony Huber and Gage Grosskreutz, and that at all times he was acting in self-defense. Highlights from the testimony was from the first witness for the state was Dominic Black. He said he considered himself a brother of Rittenhouse and who accompanied Rittenhouse to Kenosha on August 25th. Black testified that Rittenhouse had got the AR-15 from his house. Further, Black testified that he and Rittenhouse each brought their firearms to defend the property of Car Source. It's a car lot in Kenosha that lost over 100 cars in all of the riots. Black said he did not witness the shootings, but did give Rittenhouse a ride back to Antioch, Illinois. Along the way, they agreed that Rittenhouse would turn himself in Antioch, which he did later that night. On Thursday, November 4th, that began with juror number 7 being struck from the jury for a joke that he made to a police officer on the way out of the courtroom. The joke in question was in regards to the shooting of Jacob Blake. Then Richie McGinnis testified. That was the reporter from the Daily Caller who said that he began to follow Rittenhouse after he saw him running around with an AR-15 and a fire extinguisher in hopes of having a story to cover. Well, indeed he did. McGinnis witnessed nearly the entire encounter between the defendant and Rosenbaum. He said he witnessed Rosenbaum pursue Rittenhouse. McGinnis then said that the defendant ran from Rosenbaum initially, then turned around to face him, at which time Rosenbaum lunged towards the defendant in what McGinnis said appeared to be an attempt to grab his gun. He stated, quote, "It was very clear to me that he was reaching specifically for the weapon," at which point defendant shot Rosenbaum 4 times. Next to the stand was Ryan Balch, who, like Rittenhouse and Dominic Black, went to Kenosha to protect private property from the civil unrest. Balch met Rittenhouse that evening and said he could tell that Rittenhouse was young and inexperienced. Balch also testified to seeing Rosenbaum before the shooting and described him as hyper-aggressive and that he appeared to be trying to instigate armed individuals. Further, Balch testified that Rosenbaum had been yelling at he and Rittenhouse and said, quote, "If I catch you guys alone, I'm going to effing kill you," end quote. On Friday, November 5th, there was testimony from DNA analyst Amber Rasmussen of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. She testified that lab results showed that the barrel of the gun had DNA on it from 2 individuals. One was Rittenhouse, but the other was not Anthony Huber or Joseph Rosenbaum. Upon cross-examination, she did admit that even though there was no DNA on the barrel, she could not conclusively state that neither had grabbed or touched that barrel. Next to testify was Sahil Kendry, who was a co-owner of CarSource. And that was the business that got all kinds of news coverage after over 100 cars were burned on the lot during the riots. And that was the business that Rittenhouse said he was in town to protect. Now, he testified that while he had met the defendant and several others that day, he didn't know anything about any arrangement to guard his property. Further testimony came from Anmal Sam Kendry of CarSource. He testified that he had never spoken to, nor did he know who Rittenhouse was. He also said that he did not arrange for the defendants or others to guard their property. However, on cross-examination, he was confronted with a video interview he participated in, which contradicted some of the things that he had just said on the stand. And after which he said, "Okay, I did talk to Rittenhouse that day." And that was the end of week 1. On Monday, November 8th, we heard from Gage Grosskreutz. He was the 3rd person shot by Rittenhouse. He took the stand and testified as to the day's events, and he said he initially began to run to the defendant in the road because he thought he needed medical attention. However, after he saw Rittenhouse shoot Huber, he drew his gun. He initially said he was shot while his arms were in the air, but he eventually admitted during cross-examination that he had lowered his arms and pointed his gun at Rittenhouse prior to being shot. On Tuesday, November 9th, the defense started with their witnesses. They called Dr. Doug Kelly, who was the forensic pathologist who helped piece together the physical positions of Rosenbaum as the events unfolded. In his opinion, he said that Rosenbaum's hand was on or near the muzzle of the gun when it fired. On Wednesday, November 10th, Kyle Rittenhouse testifies himself. He lays out the events of the night, making it clear from his perspective that he believed his actions were all in self-defense, and at times even breaking down and crying, although some have questioned the authenticity of his tears. Then the prosecution attempted to paint a picture that Rittenhouse was willing to kill to defend property, that he had the ability to withdraw from his initial confrontation, and that the first victim had not actually touched him prior to him firing. Rittenhouse countered that he had no choice in defending himself. And that was the day the prosecution was scolded for questioning and commenting on the defendant's silence in the face of the accusations, which is a violation of his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. After this, the defense moved for a mistrial with prejudice, which would dismiss the case such that it could not be refiled by the prosecutor. It would be over. The judge heard the motion but took it under advisement and did not rule on it. Turns out the jury found him not guilty on all counts anyway, so he never will. On Thursday, November 11th of 2021, the last witness to testify was James Armstrong, who attested to some drone footage. The state then zoomed in on the footage in question, which the prosecution claimed showed that Rittenhouse pointed his AR at someone else before being chased by Rosenbaum. On Friday, the jury instructions were prepared, And then on Monday, November 15th, we had closing argument. The prosecution said that Rittenhouse was a wannabe soldier, called him a vigilante, and said that he lost the ability to claim self-defense because he instigated the encounters. The defense then argued that he was well within his rights to walk around with his AR-15, that rioters put him in a position where he faced death or serious bodily harm, and he had no choice but to use deadly force to defend himself. And that was the evidence and the arguments in the Kyle Rittenhouse case in a nutshell. The jury deliberated for 3.5 days and then came back with a verdict of not guilty on all counts. So what do you think? Tell me in the comments. Do you think that the evidence was such that Rittenhouse was guilty of any of those 7 charges, or did the jury get it right? So that's the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button for me. If you got something to say about the verdict, the trial, the evidence, put it in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so now. And you guys know it. I love it when you share me on social media. I'm Joshua Roberts, attorney at law, and you've been watching Lawyer Up.
Send lawyers, guns, and money.